Do the New York Giants have what they need amongst their receiver core for the deep passing game? We look at that and more coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Chen, a credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. And thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, we're continuing our look at the New York Giants position units, the strengths, the weaknesses, the individuals that are key, so on and so forth. And today we're going to look at the Giants receivers. Now, the New York Giants, they want to incorporate a little bit more of the deep passing game that we really haven't seen a whole lot of in the past. Now, a lot of people think that's because of the quarterbacks, and certainly that was a big problem for the Giants. But the receivers, having done a deep dive into the stats and going back and looking at a few things, the receivers weren't exactly blameless in this whole thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the receiver group as a whole, what they did well, what they didn't do well. Then we're going to take a look at the individuals. And basically, I'm going to limit it to the top four: Malik Neighbors, Darius Slayton, Juell Robinson, Jalin Hyatt. And then finally wrap it up with a few thoughts as to what we can expect, what we should be looking for this coming season. So that's what we're going to cover today. Again, welcome on in to everybody. Okay, let's get it started. Let's take a look at the receivers, the Giants receivers as a whole last year, what they did well and what they didn't do well. I mean, look, a lot of what they did well, you can tie back to Malik Neighbors, who was just phenomenal. I mean, considering that the Giants went through something like 4 different quarterbacks over the course of the season, what Malik Neighbors was able to accomplish was quite impressive. Juell Robinson probably had his best statistical career year last year. He had career highs in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. So that was certainly a positive. The rest, so-so. Okay, so let's break this down, shall we? One of the things the receivers as a whole need to address is the dropsies. All right, the Giants receivers had 33 drops last season. That was tied for third most with the Green Bay Packers. Can't have that. Malik Neighbors led the Giants receivers, led the team for that matter, with 9 drops. All right, so if there's a stain on Malik Neighbors' rookie season, that would probably be the one I would point to, the stat that I would point to. Malik Neighbors, for what it's worth, he was tied for the 9th most drops in the league amongst all receivers. So that's something he's got to clean up, and something he will clean up. I'm sure he's been working on it. Even though he wasn't able to practice during the spring, I'm sure was something that they certainly looked at. I think a lot of his drops were concentration drops. So they get that cleaned up, and really, there's not a whole lot more that you can nitpick on regarding Malik Neighbors' game. But that one, that's certainly something that you can look at and say that that's got to get cleaned up. All right, let's take a look at a couple of other things here. The receiving rate, the percentage of balls that each receiver caught. Believe it or not, Juell Robinson was tops amongst the Giants receivers with a 70.5 reception rate, followed by Malik Neighbors at 66.1 and Darius Slayton with 55.7. Now, Malik Neighbors had more targets, but Juell Robinson had over 100 targets as well. So kind of close to one another. You'd like to see maybe Slayton pick up his percentage a little bit. You'd like them to be over 60%, closer to 70%. There's no reason why they shouldn't be higher up there in the reception conversion rate. This is a big one, I thought, this next one. missed forced tackles. Now, the Giants receivers, especially down the field, as I'll point out a little later on, not very physical in terms of forcing missed tackles. The three receivers, Slayton, Neighbors, and Juell Robinson, combined for 46 missed forced tackles. Slayton had only 7 of those 46. So you look at the job by the receivers, really not as physical as you'd like to see, and that kind of translated over to contested catches and jump balls and all that stuff. So that's something maybe you'd like to see them improve on as well. Now let's talk about the red zone. The Giants receivers were targeted 35 times in the red zone. They came up with six red zone touchdowns, 17.1% out of 35. Now, look, you're not going to catch everything, but you would like to think that maybe you catch a few more than just 6. I mean, scoring was really hard for the Giants in the red zone as a whole, in particular with the receivers who just didn't really contribute in that area as much as you would have liked to have seen them contribute. So those are some of the areas that I think as a whole you want to see the Giants receivers do better at this coming season. Now, unfortunately, like I said, during the spring, Malik Neighbors wasn't able to practice because of the toe issue that he had. We saw, Juell Robinson practice, Darius Slayton practice. Jalen Hyatt was able to practice until he suffered some sort of left leg injury. I don't know if it was a hamstring, a groin, or what exactly he did, but hopefully he's going to be okay for when they start training camp in a couple of weeks. So really a lot of work still to be done by the Giants receivers. Now, y'all can sit there and say, well, the quarterback situation was terrible last year. And you're right, it was. The quarterback situation last year was not stable. It was not very good. And, some people have even said to me, well, they could have had, Justin Jefferson back there, Jerry Rice, you name the best receivers in the league, and they still would have struggled given the Giants quarterback situation. I don't know that I would argue with that. But that being said, it's like Darius Slayton once said, if you throw the ball within a guy's area code, he's got to come up with it. That's his job. And there were far too many times when the ball was thrown in their area codes and they didn't come up with it. So definitely room for improvement there. And I think that those four guys, Hyatt, Neighbors, Slayton, and Robinson, they'll all tell you the same thing, that as a group, they could do much, much better than what they did last year, as they were part of the problem. And not just the only problem. Like I said, you put some of that on the quarterback, you put some of it on the offensive line because the quarterback had a rush to throw, whatever the case may be. But the receivers were not blameless in the problems last year. All right, coming up next, we're going to take a look at the individual receivers. Again, I'm going to limit it just to the big four, as I call them. I'll talk briefly about some of the guys to keep an eye on, maybe at the back of the depth chart, and what the Giants are doing. So that's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. With Monarch Money, I've been able to get a complete glance at my household spending all in one easy-to-use app. This helps not only with budgeting and planning for the upcoming week, but also for short and long-term savings. So go on, take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com to get 50% off your first year. Again, that's monarchmoney.com, and that promo code is LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL, to get half off your first year. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And this week, kind of taking a little time off here this week. So I'm going to basically give you a show today for Monday. I'll give you one on Wednesday. And then I think I'm going to do one more for Thursday. And then I'm going to take the nice long weekend off. So we're kind of, in the quiet period of the NFL calendar. But hey, things are going to be picking up very, very soon. And the summer schedule that we have here on the Locked On NFL networks, that's going to end. So we will be right back into the thick of things. So hope you will continue to spend part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, let's take a look now at the individual receivers. Now, I basically broke down the top four. I'm going to talk briefly at the end, though, of this segment about guys maybe we want to keep an eye on and what the Giants have kind of done with this receiver group. So let's kick things off. And we will start, of course, with Malik Neighbors. Now, as I mentioned in the first segment, 9 drops. That was a stain on Malik Neighbors' record last year. That's real. I mean, really, if you're looking at the one negative that he had, that was probably it. But otherwise, Neighbors played it tough. Um, he was hurting at the end of last year, and he might have missed practice or had his practice reps managed, but the kid didn't miss any time, and I tip my hat to him for that. Now, what I would have liked to have seen them try to do, and again, this could be because of the quarterback situation they had, was get Malik Neighbors downfield a little bit more often. I felt like they didn't get the most out of Malik Neighbors and his skill set because of the quarterback play. They didn't have time to get the ball down the field. And when they did throw the ball down the field, a lot of times the ball was off target. A lot of times you saw the receivers, whether it was Neighbors or whoever was going down the field, you saw them have to kind of stop or slow down their route a little bit just to make sure they caught the balls. That was a problem. That's on the quarterbacks, no question. But still, now that the Giants have better quarterback play, presumably, you'd like to see maybe Malik Neighbors with some more downfield opportunities. All right. I've mentioned before that I would like to see Malik Neighbors moved around a little bit more, play a little bit more in the slot, where last year he played 24.1% of his snaps, and he had a 31.5% reception rate from the slot. Look, Malik Neighbors, yes, he's primarily an outside receiver, but the idea with a guy of his talent, you move him around like a chess piece. And the second you start to pigeonhole him into one specific role or two specific roles, that's when you start to limit your offense. So I'd like to see them move him around, maybe play him in the slot. And I think one of the reasons why maybe they didn't do that last year is because they didn't really want to move Juell Robinson to the outside as much. Maybe they felt that would take things away. So if you think about it, last year, the Giants had Neighbors on the outside. They had Darius Slayton on the outside. It would have been nice if Jalen Hyatt had been able to contribute a little bit more than he did. But that kind of limited the Giants as to what they could do with the receivers and moving them around a little bit. So I think this year that's going to change. At least that's the hope. All right, let's take a look now at what Malik did in the slot. 252 of his yards, 7.4 yards per reception working from the slot. All right, not too bad. He had 2 of his 7 touchdowns from working in the slot. So again, you have a talent like Malik Neighbors. Don't limit him to just one specific role. Get him involved, move him around, and see if you can create more mismatches. I think the Giants didn't do as good of a job last year with that. It could, again, be due to the personnel. I don't know, but I'd like to see that change. So overall, Malik Neighbors, what can you say about him? Guy had an amazing year, and that was with shoddy quarterback play. Imagine what he can do this year with better quarterback play. I mean, the mind just wanders and just the thought makes one drool, I think. So, all right, let's take a look at Juell Robinson. Juell Robinson, look, he's a tough receiver. Took a lot of beating, work in the middle of the field out of the slot. He only averaged, however, 7.5 yards per reception, which was towards the bottom of the league. I think part of the problem with Juell Robinson and I'm going to tie it back to the quarterback again. Juell Robinson is not a big receiver. So you send him in the middle of the field where you've got a bunch of bodies kind of, mulling around, defenders, blockers, and whatnot. He kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And then you have a quarterback who can't get the ball to him, on target with accuracy and quickly enough. And that kind of, limits what Juell Robinson can do. And I think there were too many times last year, him working from the slot, just like with the other receivers, where he had to stop, catch the ball, and then start his route again. And when you stop, even if it's just for a split second, you give the defender an opportunity to come up and get you and limit your yards after the catch. So I think that was part of the problem with Wandale's low 7.5 yards per reception. Let's see. Of his 132 targets, he had 93 catches. He was 67 of 91 in the slot. So, he's still a good slot receiver, but it's interesting because he talked about how he hoped this year he might be moved around a little bit to the outside. And I get that. Because, like I said, Juell Robinson unfortunately got lost in the shuffle in the middle of the field. And to his, this might actually work out for him. He might actually get his wish because Russell Wilson typically throws more of his passes outside of the numbers as opposed to inside the numbers. So there just might be an opportunity for Juell Robinson to get his wish to see more snaps on the outside. Juell, look, he, in my opinion, very good running the intermediate routes. The guy can separate. Believe it or not, Juell Robinson, according to Next Gen Stats, he had an average 3.2 yards separation, which was the best of the main Giant receivers, right? So it was better than Malik Neighbors' percentage. So Juell can do some damage, but again, I just suspect he was limited as to what role he played, what they asked him to do, and how much of that was the quarterback play. You can make that case, certainly, but I think this is a year we're going to see maybe a little bit more from Juell Robinson in different roles. All right, Darius Slayton, let's talk about him. Darius Slayton's hands down was the best run blocking receiver the Giants had. Wasn't even close. And I dare say that was one of the reasons why Darius Slayton beat out Jalin Hyatt last summer for wide receiver 2, because Slayton was a pretty good run blocker. But yet, here's the interesting thing about Slayton. In terms of his physicality, sometimes, you watch him play and you say, gee, he could be a little bit more physical. Now, interestingly enough, he had a 60% contested catch rate last year, which was a career best. But for the most part, when it comes to those contested catches, he's lacked in that area. Another problem with this game, the drops rose again. After he got him to knock them down the year before, they rose. He had 7 in 2024, his second highest total since 2022 when he had 8. So that needs to be cleaned up from his game. And the deep ball, can we talk about the deep ball? This is probably why a lot of people, myself included, talk about, did the Giants do themselves a disservice by not getting another receiver, a deep ball receiver, during the offseason? Darius Slayton, on pass attempts of 20-plus air yards, was targeted caught 26.7% of those, had 2 drops, and he was the intended target on 1 interception. So he went 4 of 15 on deep balls of 20-plus air yards. Now, you want to have, Malik Neighbors, we know, can catch the deep ball. He just needs that opportunity and a quarterback to get it to him. But right now, until otherwise proven, Giants don't have another receiver who is consistent in catching the deep ball. I'm going to get to Jalin Hyatt in a moment, but Slayton, just based on last year, just wasn't very good with the deep ball. All right, now let's talk about Jalin Hyatt. Speaking of the deep ball, that was one of the problems that Hyatt had. He had trouble tracking the ball. 0 for 8 on pass attempts of 20 plus air yards. And he was the intended target on 2 of the interceptions that were thrown last year by Giants quarterbacks. All right. He had an 18.6 average depth of target, which was the best amongst the Giants receivers. He had opportunities, but the ones that he had, a 42.1% catch rate, 8 of 19 with a drop, not very good. If you're not going to take advantage of your opportunities, you're not going to get out there. So he definitely had some work to do. And of course, we talk about the physicality of the game, the physicality of the role. How many times did we see Jalen Hyatt get out muscled for a ball? Or, just his downfield blocking just left something to be desired. So fast forward to the present, Jalen Hyatt added some bulk, added some strength. The hope is that now that's going to help him with his game moving forward. Because look, last year, you just to look at him, he was rail thin, and when you're rail thin, your chances are you're not going to outmuscle your competition. So Jalen Hyatt looked good this spring. We'll see if that transfers over to the summer, to the preseason, and the regular season. This is a big year for him. Now, I didn't go into detail with some of the other receivers because now when you get into receivers 5, 6, and 7 on the depth chart, you're primarily talking about special teams guys. So you figure one of the guys is going to be Amir Smith-Marset, who's a return specialist. Is Zach Pascal going to make the roster? Is one of these undrafted free agents that have looked so good in the spring, are they going to be in the conversation? It's too soon to really tell at this point. But again, the bottom 3, if they go with 7, those guys are going to have to be special teams. And the 4 that I just gave you, they really don't add anything to special teams. So that's one of the reasons why I didn't go too deep into their stats or their potential production. But the ones that I'm keeping an eye on are Pascal. Obviously, Smith-Marset, I think he makes the team. And I kind of like Daquan Felton as a potential 7th receiver if they keep 7. I don't know if they will, but if they do, I kind of like Daquan Felton. I thought he was, very active, especially, the opportunities he was given in the springtime. So we'll see if he's the guy that they end up, sticking with. All right, coming up next, some final thoughts on the New York Giants receivers. So don't go anywhere. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we're talking about the Giants receivers as we continue our look at the New York Giants position groups. Now, before I get into the final thoughts for the receivers, our next show is going to be Wednesday. So I'm going to take a day or so off. I'll do a show for you Wednesday and then probably one more on Thursday, and then we'll go into the weekend, the July 4th weekend. So, all right, let's talk about some final thoughts here. The Giants this offseason brought in bigger wide receivers, taller wide receivers. And I say it's about time because, you have a shorter quarterback in Russell Wilson who likes to throw the moonball. So having bigger receivers is going to do 2 things for you. Number one, it's going to help them find them in the sea of bodies down the field. Number 2, gives you more of a physical presence with a bigger guy. So you're not going to have some short receiver who's going up against, say, a 6'3" defensive back. I mean, the taller receiver should theoretically be competitive for a jump ball and the physicality, just knocking the defender off the path and coming down with the catch. So that was a big, big focus that I don't think gets mentioned a lot when you talk about the Giants receivers and what they did in the offseason. They added size, and it's about time they added size because look, nothing wrong with the smaller receivers, but when you have a bunch of, smaller guys and you don't mix it up, and I'm not a basketball fan, so I apologize if I don't get this terminology right, but it's kind of like having a team full of point guards and not enough, tall center types. So you want to mix it up with height. And they don't really have that, or they haven't really had that a whole lot in the past. Now they do. It's just a matter of how they sort it all out at the bottom of the depth chart. The wide receivers, um, overall, the contested catch rate, I mentioned 28%. They were 6 of 21 last year. No one was above 66.7 in terms of a rating on contested catch rate. So that's something, again, hopefully the size will, lend itself to. I mentioned Russell Wilson and, how I feel that he's an improvement over what the Giants had last year at quarterback. One of the things you saw often was how the receivers had to slow down their routes or stop in their routes to catch the ball. You didn't see that a whole lot in the spring, right? Now, again, I get it. You're not in pads. There's no contact. There's no bumping guys off the line of scrimmage. I get all that. But overall, I just feel better about the receivers, this mix that they have, the potential that's there. I think Malik Neighbors is going to certainly match his numbers from last year, if not top them. Very optimistic about that. I'd like to see Jalen Hyatt get in there and have a career year, because I know the guy works at it. He works at his craft, just hasn't had that opportunity. So it's going to be interesting to see this all play out, because was it the quarterbacks that really held the receivers back, or was it the receivers that held themselves back? Usually the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I tend to think it was more of the quarterbacks than the receivers. But that being said, as I've outlined for you on this show, the receivers have some things they need to work on. And I think if they come back for training camp in a couple of weeks and they have worked on all the stuff that I have pointed out about the drops especially, I think you're going to see a much more efficient passing game and a much more exciting game, and an offense that maybe will look a little bit more like what head coach Brian Daboll envisioned as far as mixing in the deep ball, which has really kind of been missing from the Giants offense. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. Don't forget, my next show will be Wednesday. Hope you will tune in. So until then, have a great one, and I will see you soon.